Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, which is entitled Getting More Out of Remote Working. And we have John from Drolan Consulting here to present to us. We are very lucky to have John. He has been a big supporter of the Wheatbelt Business Network and has offered to help our members across this difficult time. And John is based over at Jurien Bay, so he has a good understanding of what it's like to live and work in the Wheatbelt. And we also have Kathy Wood from Stumpy's Roadhouse, who is a WBN board member online. And Kathy and I will be participating in this webinar with John and doing his activities, and we're recording it so that our members and any Wheatbelt business can actually access this afterwards. So I will pass over to John.
Thank you very much, Caroline, and welcome to those of you who are going to participate either today or in forthcoming. Drolan Consulting is a human resource agency. We deal primarily with small business. We've been going for about 28 years. Majority of time have been in the Perth metro area, although we've covered projects from Kununurra down to Esperance. But since moving up here to Jurien Bay, I've become more and more aware of some of the factors that sort of impact on the people who are in the regional areas. Now, this particular workshop is called Getting More Out of Remote Working, and I'm just going to provide some tips. It's designed to be a series of pointers for reflection and consideration. Can I tell you, it's not a set of prescriptive requirements that are going to guarantee success. However, the points that I am making have been drawn from a variety of sectors and publications, and I've assembled them into a short program for you in your transition to this very unusual role, and that is having to work remotely. Now, some points will certainly apply, and there may be others that will not be. So due to the size of your business or your location, the resources or your industry. So what I've provided is I've given you a document that's designed to be what I call a workshop guide, where you can write your thoughts and your plans to develop and manage any of the suggestions that have been provided. If we were in a room working together, we would use this same process so that people can actually share. And there'll be time during the session for you to write and make notes, and you can talk about them afterwards. So, as initially mentioned, this particular task today is, I just want to say that my goal is to provide you with some points for you to consider, and that's the what. And then I'd like you to note on your sheet what you're doing or you're not doing, and that's the why. And finally, I want you to note how you plan to minimize or maximize that factor that we're discussing, and that's the how. And of course, at the end of the session, I'd be happy to provide a summary sheet with all these factors on, but you'll need to make some notes of what is explained there. But I'll also be happy to, if you want to contact me by email or phone, to clarify any issues that come from this session. So here we go. I'm going to put before you a number of particular things that for you just to consider. And the first one is that, look, we're working and we're living in unprecedented times for this generation. I'm not going to pretend that I've got all the answers. However, I'm going to outline a clear strategy and options for working remotely. Because working remotely is about being able to work from a location that's not your traditional office. I mean, many of us started out our career and started to work from home regularly for the first time. And that can bring a range of challenges. And these are the things that you can do to adapt to that. So what it is remote work is about being able to work from a location that's not your traditional office. And there are some factors there that you will need to actually undertake. But work has become the primary community in our lives where we develop a sense of belonging. Now, suddenly, you're taken out of that community, if you like, and you actually have to work on your own. So remote working, it's one of the key factors here is it will only succeed if you don't compromise communication and collaboration. So I'll repeat that again, that it's only successful if you don't compromise communication and collaboration. And I can't emphasize that second one too much, because see, our work was our community in our lives, and suddenly we're taken away from that, and that whole sense of belonging actually can unsettle us. So here are the 8 tips, and you may laugh at the first one, but what we're going to ask you to do is switch off. Now, we want to put that point first, because if it's possible to dedicate a physical space for your work environment, if this is not possible and you are working in your living area, well, the important thing is ensure to pack up and put it away at the end of the day. That's important, because then you can actually switch off physically. So it's quite interesting to actually make a space. But if you haven't got that, make sure that you can actually put the stuff away, because if it's there in front of you all the time, you're not going to psychologically switch off. So one of the things is that we want you to, you'll need to check with your manager regarding any policy working from home, because if you're making sure that you switch off, what are the details of the conditions that I'm working under? We even suggest that you do a self-audit to ensure that your home environment is ergonomically safe. Now, for those people who've already started this, that's fine, but you need to check from time to time to make sure that your home space is a safe space. Now, having a table or desk to work on is important, and you also want to have that table or desk important for both safety and a routine perspective. The other thing you may need to do is seek any details in writing from your manager or person responsible about the expectations that they have around security, confidentiality, and hours of work. So when you do that, if you can dedicate that physical space to your work environment, make sure it's safe, but also get clarification from your manager about, do you have a policy? Maybe this is a good time to actually develop one. It doesn't have to be so big, it just needs to be a working document that you understand and your manager understands and everyone understands. So maybe that discussion about security, confidentiality, and hours of work need to be clarified, because your hours of work are now really going to be flexible, because you have to fit it in with your timetable. So in thinking about that, you know, if it's not possible and you're working in your living space, as I've said before, ensure you pack up your laptop or whatever, put it away at the end of the day. So the first point is to be able to switch off, and you'll be able to switch off if you've covered a lot of those parameters already. Now, I'm just going to give you 30 seconds on your sheet to actually make a couple of notes, and you'll notice on the sheet it sort of says what I'm doing now, maybe what I need to do, what I need to change. Later on at the end, you can write down when you're going to do that, etc. So if I give you that 30 seconds, just to clarify in your own mind those particular points. It seems funny at the start to have switch off as the first tip, but there's a reason for it, and you can understand that as well. The second point that I want you to consider now is what we call your tools and environment. And it links in with the first. It says, do you have a good workspace set up with everything you need? So if you're going to have a camera for video calls, as well as the things that you'd like to have at hand. So one thing about the tools and environment is ensure that you have a tidy workspace, a separate one. Another question is, what about your internet connection? Or is there a company laptop, tablets, smartphones can also be set up to work? How is your Wi-Fi connection? I know people in some regional areas, I know when we first moved up here, we had trouble with Wi-Fi and we were using the neighbour's connection. Now that's fine if you just want to get email, etc. However, you'd be open to cyber security issues. So one of the things about that, if a secure Wi-Fi connection is not available, well then maybe you come up for a plan to either tether a dongle device, but make sure that the people know how to connect the microphone and camera, because you're going to find in some situations that might be something people don't have skills in that area. So in thinking about your tools and environment, once again, it comes back to this workspace, set up with everything you need, camera for video calls, as well as I put there the things that you like to have at hand. Now I know that there are certain things that I need on my desk and they have remained that same way all the time. I might even just hold up for you as an example. I have a stapler here. This stapler is getting close to 40 years old. And I think I've had it since I was 15. Okay, I'll leave that one with you because the important thing is I know what tools I need to actually work on that. So what I'd like you to do is on your sheet now, have just a couple of little notes for yourself, tick off. If you think you've got most of those, well then that's great, because the important part in this 30 seconds is for you to be able to set yourself a plan. All right. Our third point, and this is an interesting one because it's already been put forward in a question. This is called setting boundaries around your working hours. You pick a start time, you can pick an end time every day, and you can try to stick to it. Now, the suggestion here is wherever possible, seek to create your own office hours to suit your personal circumstances. Create blocks of time when you're not communicating for what we say is when you can get deep work accomplished. My little suggestion is that you turn off notifications during this time, and particularly the ones that your email pings, etc. And what do? You turn over and then you start to look at that. Whereas set yourself even boundaries at blocks of time. And the other thing is, see if you can view this time to increase productivity and quality of output. It's pretty important because if you prioritize what is important together and do that in a block, you will accomplish a lot more. If you start to try and do a little bit here and a little bit there, etc., you'll feel as though at the end of the day you've done a plethora of things but haven't made much progress. One thing is in terms of these creating blocks of time, and some people, once again, and I would emphasize this, I did a workshop up in Mukinbudin for some of your members, and one of the things that I said to them about time management is personal. And therefore, one person here will be able to do that quite well. Another person may struggle, but it's important that you try it. if you've got, I've mentioned about prioritising important, but the other side of it is, if you've got children at home, try and set some boundaries around availability, and that is your availability. In other words, I think that one of the big challenges in all this has been, particularly for mothers and some fathers, to actually be able to manage that balance and have things, particularly when kids are at an age where they actually want to be there and be part of the scenery. So it's important that you actually, if you can, set some boundaries in terms of your availability. I emphasise this particular point as well. Focus on one thing at a time. Some people find that difficult to do, but it fits in with the creating blocks of time and prioritising what's important. If there's a particular system, and you could Google it if you like, called Pomodoro, and it's a method which encourages people to focus for 25-minute blocks. And Pomodoro sort of says that, okay, you've got everything else, I'm going to work flat out for 25 minutes, and then I'm going to take a 5-minute break. And the interesting part is, it does work for a lot of people. So focusing on one thing at a time is actually quite valuable. And the other part, and this might seem a bit ironic, particularly in your home environment, say, stop work early. People working remotely tend to work longer hours, and that's starting to be proven. So you've got to be able to, it's a bit like the previous one in switching off. In other words, if you've started at 8 o'clock or 8:30 and it's 4:30, 5 o'clock, and if you follow this particular thing about creating blocks of time and prioritising what is important, it might seem a really long day, but once again, leave work early. If you start to work longer hours, you're not going to be as what we would call effective in all those aspects. We have a little sheet that we sometimes hand out at workshops, and you simply put down the list of things you're going to do that day. This is just one day, and then you prioritise them. We use a little dot system. So the high important ones are full dots, the other half dots, and then there's just little circles, or you do tick, cross, whatever. But the advantage of that is, I'm going to prioritise what is important. I'm going to focus on one thing at a time. I've created this block, and I'm going to make sure that I get it done in that time. So if you want to make a note on your sheets there about what you might need to do, that would be advantageous at this particular point. Now, it is quite interesting, because when we're now doing the fourth suggestion here, is they're all to do with managing myself and managing my time. And that's quite interesting, because once again, we've come away from the structured workplace that is set up for us. However, we don't have a lot of interruptions at work or things when we're working at home, but we've got other distractions. So this one is about establishing regular routines, because, and that is taking a regular coffee or a screen break. You can also schedule informal coffee video chats with co-workers. So the important part here is, it's actually quite interesting, and I just share a little anecdote. When I first started going into consulting work, I went and consulted with a couple of colleagues, and I went and also did a little program with a professional body. But one of the things, the practical things that was given to me, a good friend of mine, Graham, said, John, first thing, get dressed for work every day. He said, if you're going around in your tracksuit and things like that, you're not going to be psychologically in the zone. That's the first thing. The second thing is, stay out of the kitchen. I thought that was actually quite pragmatic. And where I used to work in an office from home when I started off initially, I had the local primary school across the park. And coming out of an educational background, what I did was when that bell would go at 8:30 or 8:15, I'd go into my office and start work. And when it went at 10:30 for morning break, that's when I'd go down to the kitchen and come back. So it was about establishing a regular routine. So taking a coffee or screen break, very, very important. And even if it's only 10, 15 minutes. The other thing is, don't lose a grip on when work needs to be done and when you can be flexible. And for example, if you've got little kids at home and you've got to do something with them, well, you need to be flexible. So don't lose a grip on it. But going back to the previous point about prioritizing what is important and working in the blocks together, I think this fits in quite nicely. Because remember, it's your time, it's your workspace, it's your environment. So you need to be flexible if it's required for the family that way. When you shut down, take some time for yourself. Read a book. If you want to do online yoga, watch a comedy, play with the kids, walk the dog, learn a new skill. I know lots of people have been trying to do things like jigsaw puzzles, learning an instrument, or even if you're an outdoorsy type of person who likes to sort of consider the state of the world, to meditate. These are all things, but the important part is that when you shut down, and remember the first thing that we mentioned today is about switching off, then you've got to train your mind and your body that this is a new way of working. And in this new way of working, you've got to be able to shut down and take some time for yourself. It's also particularly important on that is that set a time to do chores, but don't be tempted to go outside those hours. In other words, if you go to take a break before lunch and you go to put a load of washing on, or if there's one of the guys has sort of said, okay, I really do need to get these other jobs done, the practical things, then I can program those and say, I'll do that either before or after lunch, but don't be tempted to go outside those hours. So set a time if you've got chores to do, get them done in a particular time. Once again, I would reiterate my comments earlier about time management, and that is, it is personal. And because one person does it this way and another person does it that way, doesn't mean one's right or wrong. It's what is going to suit the way we work. And I would always say that it's a bit like learning a new skill. In learning a new skill, it does require practice. So please don't think that you're going to get it right the first time. But some of you may be quite used to that and you're able to organise your time there. So if I give you about 30 seconds just to make a few points about the regular routines so that you've got something to remind you. And as I said earlier, I will send you a summary of all these particular points. The fifth one is about communicating regularly. Now, if you are using phone or video calls, you can talk to your colleagues about your work and non-work. I don't know whether you are familiar with a program called Loom. Loom Video is probably the next best thing to be there in person, or Skype. So that when if you want to send an email, you can send an idea. If you're working with a colleague, send an idea that's actually done on video to explain it. And sometimes I find for myself, it's probably a lot easier if I can show people what actually to do there. So, however, if you've got those programs like Zoom here, where you can split the screen, you can talk to people and show them exactly what you're working on, that's so advantageous. The other thing is, if you're in doubt, pick up the trusty phone and have a chat to a team member as opposed to sending an email. One of the things that I mentioned right at the start is we are now in a different environment. We're in an environment that is in some cases foreign to a lot of people. So having to work away from our work community, it actually can make people feel a little anxious, and it'll also make people feel probably a little bit lacking in confidence. So sometimes if you've got a 5-minute break or whatever and you're finding that you just need to talk to someone, of course, if you're in a work situation, what you tend to do is go around to their office or go to their desk and talk about it, even if you've got a coffee. I was very interested this morning in checking with some clients who are in local government, and most of them are working from home. And I said, have there been any observations made by management? And this particular manager says, we're finding that a lot of people are getting through work a lot quicker. And when you ask them why, they say, well, I haven't got any distractions. Obviously, they haven't got little kids running around either. But at the same time, it's quite interesting that we do have this work community. However, when we have to work on our own, we will miss that, and therefore we need to talk to people. So if in doubt, pick up the trusty phone and have a chat, because as the lockdown, I know we're bringing stage 2 in, and it's going to allow people out a little bit more, but it's easy to feel isolated, and therefore make sure that you ring someone each day for a chat, or that you speak to people. You don't want to lock yourself right away, etc. for that. And I think the other point there is understand what is happening to yourself on that one. All right, you want to just make a little note for yourself about communicating regularly. I would imagine in some of your work, and I know a couple of people there, they're automatically having to talk and mix with people each day, and that's quite okay, even though they're physically remote from the work environment. The 6th one, this one is just about exercising and moving around. Are you moving enough? Can you build in a short walk in a local park, or maybe even setting your laptop up on a higher counter? The important part here is we believe from what we've read that probably 3 minutes of stretching every hour. By putting your laptop, if you did it on a higher counter, it's actually ergonomically a lot better. For up till 2018, 17, I was contracted to a civil engineering company on a part-time basis. And for those 7 years, I think, or 8 years, I found that by the time we got to 2017, 30% of the people had the company help them purchase and bought those ergonomic tables where people were able to stand at their desks. Why? Because they were in that environment where they needed to move around. Once again, taking regular breaks, 3 minutes of stretching every hour is very, very important. If it means getting some fresh air or just doing something that's non-work related. Now, if you go back to the scheduling that I mentioned about having a regular routine, and the second point, you will find that, okay, if you plan your blocks and then you're taking these breaks, you will feel a lot better about the next task you come into. It's a bit like a coffee break, but it has also been about focusing as well. one of the things there also is in regular breaks about fresh air, something that's non-work related, and different people are able to do that. I know some people who actually even just watch one music video just to take their mind off what they're doing for a while. All right, so that one is pretty much an understood one, really, but I'll give you about 30 seconds there just to make a note of that and maybe what you might need to do if you're not already doing it. This was also a point that was raised in a pre-webinar question about online tools that employees can use to communicate with one another while at work. There are some wonderful apps around these days, and I think that take advantage of any apps. They're easy to acknowledge, sort of productivity and limiting or regulating your access to social media. And that's one of the challenges, because your aim is to get as much done in certain blocks, and therefore that's what we would call productive work. But you'll get your productivity limited if you're constantly back and forth between that and social media. So be prepared, and once again about taking breaks, by exercise, move around, take a break from social media for a while. So you will find it a lot easier to concentrate. There are several forms of messenger services like Slack, which is a messaging and a collaboration app, HeySpace, and of course we're using Zoom and Microsoft Teams. So if you can shut out a little bit of social media and restrict the email pings that keep going off, you will find your brain, after a while, you will find it a lot easier to focus, and you will actually get through a lot more work. It's quite interesting because when you use those particular communication tools, you're actually engaging in another exercise that's going to take your mind and your energy. If you're constantly being interrupted with other things connected with social media, your mind will come back out of that focus on the work. But use a couple of these other apps, find out what ones that you might like to use just for keeping in contact with people. Because, you know, if you're at work and you leave work, you sometimes walk with people to someone, let's go and get a coffee. And when you can't do that, it's nice to be able to talk, but if you've got some way of sharing it, and that's why some of these other apps that people are using at the moment are actually helping them get through the challenge. So I think it's particularly important that we be, one, aware of them, and two, take advantage of them. And you can make a little note there of anything that you think will be quite valuable. And the 8th point that I want you to take on board or suggest here is celebrate success. It's easy to acknowledge small wins for yourself and for others from far away, but it boosts morale and shows appreciation for yourself and for others. So be prepared to share things with your colleagues and share achievements. And if one of your colleagues does something, even if it comes through electronically, be prepared to acknowledge that with them. Because if you've noticed someone has actually produced something and it happened quite quickly, or it's different because it's now presented in a different format, be prepared to acknowledge. You'd be surprised, once again, remembering back at the start when we talked about our work is a community in a sense. and now we're having to work remotely and we take away from that community, we've got to look at opportunities for celebrating success. And also, it's a great morale booster. If you did something, be prepared to share the achievements with some of your colleagues. That's important, because if you were working in an office environment or a workshop or an industrial complex, and you saw someone do something and that was particularly good, you say, hey, that's great. But if you don't see it, well, then it's very hard to acknowledge that achievement, etc. So be prepared to share achievements with colleagues. The other thing is expose yourself to some positive news and ideas. I found that in the early stages of this lockdown, that constantly getting updates on phone and through email, etc., it was almost every 3 hours or 2 hours, something was coming through to saying the number of cases being identified was going up, etc., etc. I found that actually quite distracting, and I also found it quite concerning. Now, I notice within myself that, so if I'm going to spend part of my day just getting news feeds, etc., so I think I'd be probably struggling by the end of the day, saying, oh my goodness. Whereas what I found for myself is I turned that off, but I just checked in a couple of times a day, but I also look for the positive news and ideas. And so I know there's a site or an organisation called Future Crunch, which talked about the good news around the COVID-19. There was good news from the front lines. I had a look at it once or twice. I just found that quite positive. We can talk about the negative things, but to be quite frank with you, I am now quite excited because, and why am I excited? I'm excited about the fact is, I think if people have managed to do this for a couple of months and businesses are going to be reshaping, I think we're going to have different forms of business. We're going to have different ways of working, and I think we will be a lot better. It will be challenging for a while. It'll be that human physical contact that people can't have, but at the same time, I think we will actually have a better workforce. The challenge will be having work for everyone, and that is my other little worry, etc. So, they're the 8 particular points. Now, I've given you that sheet of paper and you've made your little notes on it. After this particular presentation is finished, what I want you to do is you can make a note of the things that you're already doing and you're comfortable with, that's fine. Highlight any suggestions we've provided, and I will send you the summary sheet. And things that you are not doing or that you need to change or you need to modify, then you can put that on your sheet as well. But then I've also put in a little column there, draw up a plan to make the required changes. No one will say, yes, I'm going to do that. Well, I want to know, when are you planning to do it, and make sure it comes. So that sheet is not just a summary of what we've presented to you, it's also going to be your plan for going forward. So that's what the review exercise. Make a note of the things you're doing, comfortable, highlight suggestions provided that you are not doing or need to change or modify, and finally, draw up your plan to make the required changes. Okay, some suggestions for you personally. I always like to, I suppose, in workshops, provide something for people at the end. Here's a couple of suggestions. Seek support through family and friends. That's important. Secondly, nurture a positive view of yourself. If you're able to do this, this is a new skill. That's fantastic. You are doing something now that you didn't do before. You had to do it. However, this is something, and I think having a positive view of yourself. Keep things in perspective. We're very lucky with our government here, both federal and state, and that and people have responded. So things are currently changing, but you have to keep them in perspective. The other thing is look for any opportunities for self-discovery. I have to admit, having to change a few things the way I do things is being part of saying, well, hey, that wasn't too bad. After all, I've learned something for myself. Take decisive actions to act on adverse situations. Don't let the situation impact on you. You impact on the situation. The other part is where there are crises, try to avoid seeing them as insurmountable problems. If someone had told you 6 months ago that what we were going to have in March and April was the whole country was going to close down and we were going to do this and that, people wouldn't have believed it. And people say, but what can we do? Well, we've still got big issues to address, and particularly in terms of employment, turnover, finance, etc. However, it is not insurmountable. It will take a long time and it will be quite hard for a while. Do things that you enjoy and find relaxing. I've mentioned that before, but I think it's important that you do. And if you've got your own personal ways of actually relaxing. The other thing is maintain a hopeful outlook, because if you've been doing this for a little while, it actually is getting a lot easier. I've already mentioned about taking regular exercise. At this point, accept that change is part of living. And that is a particular critical point. And develop realistic goals for yourself and your work and move towards them. And look, those particular things is more for you as a person. And if you're seeking your support, having a positive view, trying to keep things in perspective, doing a bit of relaxing, try not to see things as the crisis that's insurmountable. It really is change and it's part of living. But if you develop realistic goals and say, okay, in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to do this, then in the next months, etc., work forward. I would hope that in 3 months' time, I will actually be a lot better at putting together things in a different format for people like the Wheatbelt Business Network, because I know how I prefer to run workshops, but if we have to do it this way, well then that's great. I need to learn, and hopefully I've got one of my goals is to actually to set up and become more proficient, and I'm moving towards it. So remember, days are made of moments. And some of those moments are moments of happiness. And those moments are the moments that you're no longer in pursuit of happiness. Well, I hope those 8 points are going to be somewhat valuable for you. And as I said at the start, if there are any issues that you want me to follow up on, you can email me. And I'm happy to also follow up either with a phone call, email, or maybe a Skype call or whatever. Thank you very much. And I wish you the best as you move forward in this particular environment. Back to you, Caroline.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was really good. I have written down a point for each of your 8 tips and things that I'm going to work on. And the Wheatbelt Business Network, we've worked remotely for 10 years now, with our staff being all over the region, working from home, and our board members. But I'm pleased to say that I have 4 things there that I have to improve on and do, which is really, really good. I'm really glad that you raised those points. It's excellent. Kathy, do you have any questions or any comments for John?
Yeah, John, that was amazing. That was a lot more comprehensive and extensive than I was expecting. So thank you. One thing I'd like to pick up on, and that is something you mentioned, was it Pomodoro?
Oh, Pomodoro.
Pomodoro, is it? Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Look, it's as the name would indicate, it's a Spanish program. I only came across it. I've got another colleague. Well, actually, I've got about 3 or 4 consultant colleagues around the world, if you like. David works in New Zealand, and he and I chat occasionally and we share stuff. And I was talking to him about this particular program that you people asked me to put together. And I said, look, I've got a whole lot of things here. And he said, oh, look, one of the things that I've used before for people with time management is Pomodoro. So I explained it. So I went in and had a look, and there was a YouTube thing. Now, it's nothing big and flash, but one of the things that I think it highlights again, Kathy, the issue that you raise, and I know a lot of people raise, is we are, even at our younger stage or older stage in life, we are people of routine. And the routines that we're working in at the moment are a result of a lifetime of what we've been doing. But we need to train ourselves. And I know personally, if I come in and sit at my desk here and I've got this to do, I can give myself now a particular time frame and say, I am going to work non-stop on this for 25, 30 minutes. Then I'm going to take a break. And it's amazing what it does for your brain. It's actually quite interesting. And the Pomodoro theory principle is exactly like that.
Oh, thank you.
That's okay.
Brilliant. Well, just a reminder to our Wheatbelt businesses that John is available to have a chat to. He is a leader in his field. We've used him a little bit, and we are so glad that we found you, John, all the way over in Jurien Bay. Yeah, if you would like the worksheets after this webinar, then please get in contact with me at the Wheatbelt Business Network, and we can go there from there. So thank you very much, John. Much appreciated.
All right. And I look forward to working again on Thursday.
That sounds good.
Excellent.
Thanks, John.
See you then.